So welcome to the March 2021 virtually TIN meeting. I'm not going to say much about this meeting because Heather's organised it brilliantly, and it's going to be a fascinating meeting around pandemic changes. I'm going to tell you about forthcoming meetings. Our next meeting is in April on the 22nd. We're staying with this pandemic issue, and this one's about distribution post-pandemic. We know there are going to be a lot of changes. We've just been talking amongst ourselves about whether people will be offices, whether they'll be remote. What I'm interested in is how this is going to impact on distribution, and I think it's probably broader than we think. So we're looking at the impact across the value chain, from asset managers through to advisor. I was struck by a comment Blair Duquesne made on Twitter, which was she sees the whole of the US as a oyster now because people are happy with Zoom meetings. Therefore, why restrict yourself to, in her case, New Orleans? And clearly, a lot of people are going to look at that opportunity. A lot of advisors say they're not going to have an office, which interests me because as a client, I'd be slightly suspicious about an advisor without an office. It just doesn't feel right. But what implications does that have for providers? How are the distribution side of asset managers going to link up with IFAs or their gatekeepers? How is technology going to support the advisor who may be working a bit like the old man from the Pru in the client's living room? How's that all going to be brought together? I'm not sure that we considered all these aspects. So our speakers are Blair, who I just mentioned, Adam Owen, who was one of the founders of NextGen, which is a group of advisors who are young and open-minded, not cursed with all the mantras of the baby boomer advisors, and looking to do things in a different way, I think a better way, using technology, thinking forward, not thinking backwards. So that's going to be fascinating. Then we've got Doug Abbott from Schroders. And the reason I went for Schroders, the Schroders have got, apart from a superb company, Jillian, they've got a bancassurance, Schroders Personal Wealth. They've got an IFA network, best practice. They've got an IFA, Aspectate, and they are a fairly significant asset management business. So they've got all the issues of distribution under their umbrella, which should be interesting. And hopefully, subject to paternity leave, we've got Danny Cox from Hargreaves Lansdown. And as you all know, Hargreaves are not only a D2C platform, they also have about 100 advisors. So they're looking at the hybrid digital advisor model more perhaps than most. And I think that could be probably the way of the future. I'm not saying necessarily Hargreaves, but that kind of model where you can phone a friend if you want to. And I believe that everyone will operate digitally as much as they can because of the cost saving. That's clients especially. Why do you want to go to a meeting which costs you a great deal of money when you can do it on Zoom? So there's lots and lots of possible change happening very quickly, and we want to try and get a handle on that. So that's the next meeting. On July the 2nd, thanks to our friend Schroders, we are having a face-to-face drinks meeting. No business, well, no conference, no talks, just having a drink and a nibble and chatting to friends. Schroders have got a wonderful open air facility on the top of their brilliant building in the city. So that's a step forward, and that's July the 2nd at 4:30. And on October the 7th, 8th, we've got a face-to-face meeting. I haven't got an agenda yet. I've just booked a hotel. So 7th, 8th of October, we have an old-fashioned face-to-face meeting where we can have a drink, we can have something to eat, listen to great speakers, have a row, have a debate, as we normally do. So that's the medium-term future. I hope to see you all at Schroders in July, and if not, at the Old Bethlehem, where it'll be in October. Now I'm going to hand over to Heather. Heather, over to you.
Great, thanks, Clive. So that's probably a really good setup for the theme for today, which is back to face-to-face work. And the reason I said back to face-to-face work and not back to the office is because so much of the work we do isn't necessarily in the office. It's also about having face-to-face meetings at the investment network. We have a fantastic, I think, of course I'm biased, but I think we have a fantastic agenda today to kick off a conversation. I'm going to share some slides from research that we did, so a survey of all of you about what your fellow members of the investment network are thinking in terms of plans for the return to the office. I'll share that in a minute. And then we'll hear from Simon Grundy and Annelies Tverkor from Ward Robinson. They were introduced to me actually by Emma Napier, who's here today. They've just redone the offices, or redoing the offices for True Potential, and have done a lot of thinking about what an office should look like as we come out of the pandemic and what the role of the office is. So it should be fascinating to hear what they have to say. Sally Ann Crudas, who's head of HR for Bravura. Again, thank you, Emma, for suggesting Sally, is going to talk about managing teams through a pandemic. And some of the things that she's going to talk about, I think, are really important also for the return to the office, because there's all sorts of complexities in managing a hybrid team. So that should be fascinating. And Tom Walker is going to round it out, who's the co-head of global property securities for Schroders, about the future of cities. And I did this earlier when I said future of cities, because fingers crossed, I've always been a city girl and I always want to be a city girl. So I'm really hopeful and optimistic about the future of cities. And so every time I do one of these, I take a risk and do something different. We're then going to go into breakout rooms. So if it all works, you're all going to be magically put out into breakout rooms and have an opportunity to talk to one another, because as much as it's great to hear fantastic content, part of the network is talking to one another. That's one of the most important parts, and one of the things that's been the hardest to do for the last few months or year now. So hopefully that all works. And we have some fantastic hosts for those breakout rooms. So let me share the slides from the survey that some of you kindly responded to. So we had 44 responses, and I'm just going to share a few of the slides. I will send around the full deck afterwards. So a few things that to highlight. Has your company announced a planned date for the return to the office? 2/3 said no date's been announced. People are really playing this by ear. They don't want to make commitments that they have to go back on, probably feeling a little bit like Boris Johnson in that respect. And so no firm commitments. For those that say that their firm has announced a date for the return to office, that was mostly September, October, or May, June. So most of people were saying Q3 around September, October, and second was May, June. In terms of, I have to figure out how to go forwards. There we go. In terms of what that office looks like, it's definitely not a return to normal. So 7% said return to business as usual for most or all aspects, but really people are rethinking how they return to the office. 60% or 59%, sorry, said the return to the office is seen as a potential for innovation, really taking a fresh look at how the office, the function of the office, how the company operates, and reinvent practices. So we can expect a lot of innovation and rethinking about what that role of the office is, which makes the presentation from Simon and Annelies, I think, really pertinent. So what are the physical changes you expect in the office? So, lots of people saying staggered work times and days, more spacing between desks, use of hot desking. So really these physical changes. Alex, when he put together the slide deck, Alex Johnson, if you haven't met him, he's our quant analyst at NextWealth. He used this term agile working methodology. And I think that's a really good way to capture some of this. So being more agile in the way that we work rather than having assigned desks that you go to each day. Far fewer people talking about mandatory mask wearing and screens and so on. It's really about rethinking how people are set up and how they're working. We asked about the reasons for the return to the office, and the top reason, as you might expect, is about collaboration, and second is for a sense of personal well-being, social interaction, really closely related to that sense of personal well-being. So the office is about collaboration, brainstorming. We're talking about having an on-site for NextWealth. We used to talk about having off-sites, but no more. Now it's about on-sites. That's how collaboration, teamwork, and brainstorming can happen on Teams. What are the expectations for the size of the firms? This isn't really about the return to the isn't really about the return to the office, but is about whether the team's going to grow or shrink. And I wanted to include this because I was really pleased to see just the level of optimism among our members. So 45% say that they expect their team to grow in number, and 40% expect it to stay the same size. Only 8% say that they expect that to shrink. That's not a huge sample, but you know, given the Bank of England news out today about the fantastic boom that we're going to have as we come out of this, you know, companies and members of the investment network are feeling optimistic about their team size growing. And last slide I wanted to share is about you know, some of the statements about remote working that people agree or disagree with. And the most interesting thing to me out of this is 84% of investment network members said that they expect to work at home at least 2 days a week post-pandemic. So people have really embraced that there are some benefits with this. Same number saying that the stigma about home working is gone, and some other really interesting statements on this. One thing that I was personally curious about is towards the bottom there, you see only 16% that said that the pandemic has increased gender inequality. So I just looked back at the individual responses on that, and it was really different between female and male respondents. Half of female respondents, so there was only 10, but half of them said that the pandemic had increased gender inequality. So a real difference in how that was viewed between that rather small sample of female respondents. So that's it for the slides. And there were some other bits. Sorry, I have to figure out how to unshare my screen. I have to move my camera. So there's some other bits that we didn't share, but we'll send around the full deck. But those were the things I thought were most interesting out of that. So that takes me on to introduce our first speakers, Simon Grundy and Annelies Gore from Ward Robinson. Over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Can you see my screen? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Hi there. Sorry, my slides are just in the wrong place. So we're Ward Robinson, and we are a design and project management organisation. We design office, hotel, and leisure. I'm sort of more focused on the workplace sector, and I've been working in workplace for now around about 30 years, designing offices, seen a lot of changes. My biggest clients, we've got a mix of clients from both private and public sector, biggest client being HMRC. I'll hand over to Annelies now to explain her role in our business.
Hi everyone. So I'm Annelies Tavergor. I'm a workplace consultant with Ward Robinson. In case you're not familiar with workplace consultancy, it's the science, if you like, behind the interior design that Simon's doing. So I look at how we design workplaces to support productivity, innovation, mental, physical well-being. Excuse me. And I'm also a change manager. So I do the hand-holding as organisations transition from one way of working to another way of working. Up until a couple of years ago, my career was in London, and I had clients across Europe, some in the States as well. In financial services, I was very lucky. I was involved with the workplace design and ways of working at the Aon headquarters, if you know that building. Also HSBC, specifically the commercial banking group, nationwide, and Citibank. And since we're seeing this emergence of fintech as well, I've also worked with companies like Microsoft and LinkedIn, so bringing all of these things together.
So just a bit about the process, really, and the process begins with that light bulb moment when I'm just going to move my screen there. Process begins with that light bulb moment when True Potential, our long-term client, realized that their business was performing well, incredibly well. I don't know if you've seen their figures, but they've had a brilliant year during the lockdown. And we've always talked to them, kind of like we've done a lot of work with them in terms of like the next step. They're always thinking about the next step. So in the depths of the global pandemic, in a time when a lot of people are only managing the basics right, True Potential actually called us to say it was time for another chat about design. So we've worked with them, we worked with Daniel and his team over 15 years. And as the business has developed, we work closely to create groundbreaking ideas, which have pushed the boundaries of office space design. The picture in the background there is actually the last fit out. So I mean, it's always had a touch of, maybe a touch of Bond in it in terms of the design, and maybe the kind of the way we've approached it. Everything, you know, looking kind of a little bit better than just a little bit different, and pushing, you know, simple, effective and unique being their strapline. They've always pushed that in terms of everything we've done, but we've all, and there's a lot of trust there, trust in the outcome of the process, a trust that the outcome will always move on and keep developing. So again, we'll get the call quite often to make a change. Now, what I'm going to quickly do, or what we're going to do, is just I'm going to hand over to Annalise now, who's going to describe the why of the process, and why this is such an important change, and why it's happened.
Great, thanks. So many of you will be familiar with agile working. You might have it in your workplaces at the moment. It is very common in the financial services. For anyone who isn't familiar with it, I'll just rattle through some of the features. The main one would be that you don't have your allocated desk or office, but instead you have a range of spaces available to you to work in. You're encouraged to choose the space according to the task, rather than your status or anything like that. If it's a quiet task that needs high levels of focus, then you take yourself off to a more private space where you won't be disturbed. And those spaces range from being very open, that support collaboration and encourage collaboration even. And then they range to those very private ones where people know that person isn't to be disturbed right now. The benefits of agile working are better productivity, increased collaboration. It's used as a recruitment tool for a lot of people who expect that kind of way of working now. And most importantly, for a lot of people, vastly improved real estate efficiency, despite having an enhanced workplace. So it's really a win-win situation for lots of people. So this isn't new, but now we're pushing it even further. So agile working plus, if you can say that. And this is why. So we've been doing a lot of research with our own clients, and encouragingly, the results that come back are entirely in line with what you've just said, and also what we're finding from other people. Because people want to know how our workplace is going to be when people start coming back to the workplace. It's quite clear now that it's not ever going to be what it was before. I think this experiment has gone on too long for it to ever go back there again. But for us in particular, we need to design spaces to support how people want to work and help them to do it even better. So this slide here is an example of some research we did with another financial services client. And just the second chart there is where we should start actually. Would you like your days to be fixed in advance or flexible? 71% of people do not want to lose the flexibility given this last year, which is not surprising. Behind this result, lots of people feel that the flexibility has given them much better work-life balance. They can pick their kids up from school, have dinner with their families, they commute less. I know what it's like to not get back from work till 8, 9 o'clock at night on a good day. And so this has really relieved that tension for a lot of people, and they don't want to go back there. And in fact, even the people who want those days to be fixed in advance, that's also a choice. Thank you. Actually, Simon, just go back up.
Yeah, no problem, sorry.
Thank you. And then the chart at the top comparing days in the office before lockdown and after lockdown, what people want to do. It shows that the 5-day-a-week club is become very, very small. The majority of people just want to be in the office for 2 to 3 days a week. And again, if you want to come into the office 5 days, that's absolutely fine. But we're trying to predict what occupancy is going to be like. Moving on to the next one. And not everyone wants to come in for a full day either. So there'll be variations in the occupancy during the week, but also during the day that we need to be mindful of. Some people want to come in just for the morning or for the afternoon. So there might be a sense that people are just dropping in, and that becomes important in this design as we go on. And then when people do come into the office, what are they going to do there? This is just showing who wants to spend more time and less time on different activities. The -8 is working alone. So the office is not going to be the place for a lot of people to do work on their own. Quite frankly, as long as they have dedicated workspace at home, then it's better to do it there. What they'll come into the office for is working together with other people. And it's not very surprising. It's a bit of a relief to us in a way, because we can stop pretending that the office needs to be everything to everyone. We know that it doesn't work particularly well for that. And also just to remind you that working in a pandemic has been very binary. We've either been at home all the time or in the office, and the future isn't like that. There'll also be options that we call third spaces, which would be working from coffee shops or other public spaces. And that will also help to take some of the pressure off workplaces so that the workplace can just focus on what it's really, really good at. And Simon will show you how the design responds to these findings.
Thanks, Annalisa. So onto the how, and I'm just going to very quickly rattle through this because there's such a lot to say about the project. How we created the right scheme for True Potential on the backdrop of what Annalisa's just described there. That conversation started with True Potential back in September last year. They wanted to create something that was really focused on it being a destination for people to come back to. They wanted it to be the glue that held the organization together. They wanted to have that ultimate flexibility so that actually today isn't what's going to be tomorrow and the day after. They want flexibility in the spaces we're designing for them. And they wanted it to really aid communication. So again, as Annalisa said, people coming in to actually communicate and collaborate. Also, they want the spaces to work hard. So a lot of the spaces you can see in this plan, collaboration spaces, actually we had to push how they were used in many different ways and act as a home from home as well. So again, everyone's been working at home. So you've got like multiple settings at home. You've got the breakfast bar, the couch, the office, and the standard office and the dining table. So all of those kind of settings are actually within this office space. And also they wanted to be able to access outdoors. So we've created this big garden space with sliding doors and what have you. So the office can access the outdoors, and actually this can be used as another workspace. And opening up, so we created big open spaces around the atrium so that actually there was more visibility between teams and people working in the space. And we've actually put living walls into the building too. And the whole thing's technology enabled. So basically you can sit anywhere, plug in and work with your handheld devices and what have you. Everyone's got a handheld device now. Nobody has a tower PC. We wanted the space to be very social. So we've designed kitchens into the space. One of the key things, one of the quotes that came out of some of the research we did with them was, we've mentioned it here, I can still have a desk if I want, but I can have multiple other options. And that's again, that's some of the patterning coming out of working at home. We were already talking to clients like HMRC about agile working, but this has actually pushed it into like 20 years on in some conversations we've had. It's just, you know, talking about positives coming out of COVID, there aren't many, but actually for us, it's helped us present this in a much more positive and kind of a way that people actually can understand what we're saying now about agile working. And what we also created are kitchens that on every floor that are really the heart. And Annalisa and I were talking earlier about families that eat together, stay together, and there's a kind of big part of that. We're talking about that with clients now, about kind of, you know, that actually being quite an important part of the business day. And henges, we create these henges, and they're all one on each floor. And these are kind of like, we call them henges. They're actually, you could call them coliseums, or they're kind of circular talking places with projection screens and places to sit and talk. And they can actually work as a kind of bit like a campus step as well. So people can come in and sit down, plug in and work there too. So it has, again, spaces that work hard. And there's power and data everywhere. And you can cast the screens all over the space. So you can get together as a team, work, or, you know, maybe for a day on a project, and you can cast to a local screen everywhere. So we've got more spaces. We've only got 120 traditional desks in an office that used to have 360. So this is really pushing the agile concept. You used to be talking about 80-20 ratios with a lot of clients, but now actually this has gone way beyond even 50%. They want to just go back, and they want the traditional desk as an option, but they want everything else as an option too. And they've got a rota for people working in the building as well, so that not everybody's coming in at the same time, but you can come in outside of the rota and use the other collaborative spaces. They wanted it to be creative in terms of thinking, collective and cerebral. So you've got lots of different types of spaces in there, some library type spaces. Place to touch base with the ethos and the brand of the company, a showcase for the business. And as the business grows, we talked about it being a club, and the club just gets busier and busier, but the space doesn't have to grow. You can actually make the space work harder, which is a big part of the concept. So I'm just going to quickly show you some pretty pictures here, because these are the kind of digital pictures we created as part of the design process. And I'm going to run through these really quickly. But one of the main spaces was an expo, place where they're actually going to do training, which feels more like a shop space, a bit more like an Apple store than a traditional training center. And they want people to come in and really train on kind of like, on handheld devices, video screens going. There are kind of little breakout areas where you go and have a kind of collaborative session, come back. A big part of their organization. Business lounge, instead of a traditional reception area, people can come in here and work. People from the organization can come in for the day and work. Clients can come in, everybody kind of working together in a multi-shared space. A bit like, and we've got lounges all over the building, and these are the screens where you can cast to. So you've got these room dividers and domestic type settings all over the building. You can see a bit of a green wall there behind. That's the green wall, internal green wall that brings some biophilia, and biophilia being a kind of, a term for living things inside the building. We've also created this as garden space outside, which is accessed from the office kitchen areas. Kitchen being a kind of term for like the dining space rather than a catering kitchen. And these spaces are kind of, again, going to be used for collaboration, but also just time out with the office space, which is a big driver with the conversations we had. We also created, sorry about that. We also created dining spaces. We've also created more lounge spaces throughout the building. These are the hinges I talked about, the spaces where you can sit and collaborate, the big team presentations. And also there are spaces where you can just sit and actually have small meetings in that space too, or you can just chill out there as a time out from the office, the normal office space. See some, these are the kitchen spaces, again, much more sort of drive towards a domestic feel in there, big open plan areas. And around these hinges, we've also got these kind of quiet spaces as well, where you can sort of move away from the busy group into quiet space, more cerebral work. You can see here, this is kind of the atrium link where you've got green walls, living space inside the building, and more lounge spaces too. So just a real focus on like lots and lots of different work settings, spaces where you can actually go and work in a different way. And all of this furniture has power in, so you can plug in and work anywhere. More alternative work settings there, just to show you the kind of the sort of the various different things that we've got in the space. And these are the kind of these room dividers, creating between every team desk area, we've kind of created a room divider space, so it doesn't feel like a sea of heads. Get away from that kind of old corporate look. More kitchen space. And there's kitchens on every single floor, so they're kind of the real heart of the building. And this home from home setting, so like the furniture settings are a little bit, well, a lot more domestic than your traditional office space settings. More connection to the living wall.
Can I ask a question about this space?
Yeah.
One of the changes that happened in office design a couple of years ago was thinking about how different between extroverts and introverts, and some people really value their privacy and their space, and they wanted, and so there were sort of these pods created for private spaces for people to work. And I was just wondering if that was a consideration, and how that's dealt with sort of the different ways that people like to interact and work with people, and making them feel welcome and at home.
I think it comes back to choice and having the choice. And so the work we've been doing with HMRC over the last 5 years, very much about that, because they have a huge range of types, people working within the organisation, and creating pods and quiet spaces as well as big collaboration spaces is very much part of that concept. And the ability to do, and it's sort of affected how people feed back about things like light and acoustics and the sensory elements, because quite often people who have issues with that are kind of a little bit more introverted and tend to be more kind of like find those things problematic. And we've found that by designing these spaces, and some of the feedback we've had is that has kind of died off as an issue, because there are more choices to make, and having the choice is the big key thing within all of it. So it's not, I mean, it's no longer about people needing to be in the office. It's about at a desk. It's about the activities. So obviously, I think, kind of just summing it all up, that's what it's changed to. It's about the activities you can do in the space and the club you go to do those activities. And just a quick last slide there, just to show you that we're actually doing it. So having these conversations during lockdown was a big thing. Being able to design it during lockdown, and actually their thing is, True Potential's thing is that they're going to come out of lockdown with a new normal, and that, everyone's talking about the new normal, but they're actually going to have it in reality, and they're ready to go with it. So quite exciting times actually for them and for us to work on it with them. Sorry, I rattled through that rather quickly.
Yeah, that was great to see, and really good to see those examples of how the theory goes into practice. It's fantastic, and it's Daniel Harrison has offered to anyone in the investment network who'd like to talk about his reasons and the business reasons. If you want that perspective, he's happy to follow up. I'm going to move on to our next speaker just to keep us to time, so that we have enough time for that breakout session. But if there are questions, I know that that Annalise and Simon are staying, so you can chat them directly, or I can share their details afterwards. Sally-Ann, if I can come to you next. Sally-Ann Krudus is head of HR EMEA for Bravura Solutions, and is going to talk to us about managing teams through the pandemic. And I'm scanning my screen. I know she's here.
I am here, Heather. Hello.
Hi there. There you are. Great. Welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. So thank you, Heather. Really nice to see you and meet you all. So as Heather said, I'm Sally-Ann, and I have the pleasure of looking after HR at Bravura for EMEA. So Heather and I have talked about what to cover in this session, and what I'm going to talk about is how Bravura's had to figure out how to make remote working work from a people management, well-being and productivity perspective. So to give you some background and colour on our business, we're a global organisation with just over 1,400 employees. And before the pandemic, we'd not committed to a remote working model. We did have employees taking occasional working from home days, and Fridays were slightly quieter in the office because of that. But there was no sort of regular rhythm in place at that time. So like many companies and employees and individuals on this call, we had that kind of traditional default model of standard business hours in the office and presenteeism, the kind of things that Annalise and Simon were just talking about moving away from. So when the working from home orders came in, this was really unknown and unplanned territory for us all, and quite a different space for us to work with. And like others, we also wrongly assumed that we'd return to the office after a few months and didn't expect to be working remotely for a year on, over a year now. So I wanted to share some of the details of our journey and our findings during that time. And the place to start really was in the first few months of being at home. And I remember leaving the office and we were asking ourselves questions, and they were circling around my head at the time, on how do we know that people will be doing their jobs? And are employees set up correctly to do their jobs? And conversations then followed, and this really resulted in us providing our managers and employees with tools and techniques to manage a remote workforce. And we had to become more focused on outcome and impact rather than hours worked, as we had employees juggling with new homeschooling responsibilities and elder care. And with engagement, we increased our newsletters and listening exercises and started to deploy more regular surveys and town halls and workshops to actually find out how our employees were tracking. And we also importantly set up online support groups to make sure that we could all stay in touch. Then by month 6, things started to change again, and our focus had to change with that. So we started to look at how do we measure the performance of a remote worker, and what would the wellbeing implications of COVID be on our workforce? And that was both physically and mentally. So with performance management, we encouraged our employees to be more focused and clear with purposeful objectives. And our concerns around productivity and what made a good employee quickly changed to how do we stop employees working excessive hours? How do we ensure that employees are taking regular breaks, and also that they're taking their annual leave? Also, it was around this time that the mental health charity Mind confirmed that we were in a global mental health crisis. So things really shifted then, and mental health and wellbeing became a real priority for us. We started to experience this for ourselves as well, with employees struggling with things like loneliness, anxiety, and exhaustion. And our employee assistance program usage tripled within that period. So we started to deploy wellbeing workshops on subjects like managing change, sleep, resilience, and we gave our employees additional volunteering leave, which could be used for childcare and elder care, and just to give our employees that flexibility with their time. Then by the end of 2020, our focus moved to burnout and digital fatigue. So how we could help our employees to manage through this time. It had been such a long period of time, and people were really felt quite exhausted by the new restrictions coming in. Well, the restrictions coming in again, not necessarily new, but coming in for that 3rd time. So to help support our employees, we introduced some new ways of working, and this included things like lunchtime blockouts, shorter default meeting times. So we actually have reduced our meetings from 30 minutes to 25, and from 1 hour to 50 minutes, to allow people to have a short break and not back-to-back meetings throughout the day. And we've also introduced catch-up meeting-free Fridays to allow our employees to have that opportunity to catch up. And now looking forward from here, like you all will be, we're starting to prepare for the easing of the restrictions and moving away from that COVID enforced remote working to start to consider what comes next. So some of the questions and considerations that we're asking ourselves are, how will current employees and future talent want to work? And in fact, Heather's covered some of this at the start, and it's really interesting to see those stats on what people's expectations are as we come out of this pandemic. And what type of wellbeing support will companies need to provide during this period of change? Because actually the reopening of things and the reintroduction of the office is going to carry a lot of change and potentially anxiety with that for our employees. And how we ensure that the new ways of working are inclusive. Otherwise, it seems likely that men will be in the office more and get more face time compared to women and other underrepresented groups, like employees with disabilities, as an example. And I guess linked to that, do we need to look at training managers on unconscious bias to ensure that there is that equality on how they lead, manage and measure performance going forward? And lastly, I think it's really important for us to be really open to experiment with different ways of working. and to use pilots and adapt processes where necessary. The traditions of the office are really hardwired in us all. So in my opinion, learning as we go and listening to our employees and being flexible is going to be really key during the period ahead. Heather, I hope I've stuck to time and that's useful.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. I think that point.
Any questions?
I think your point around attracting different talent, such as people with disabilities, is such a good one, because I think sometimes we underestimate how hard it can be to get to a city or get into an office in the city with a disability. So I think that's an absolutely fantastic point. Any questions from our? We're doing 2 minutes. So I guess the question for me would be.
I've got a question actually.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. Now, have you been running employee engagement surveys throughout this whole time? And do your employees want to come back to the office?
So Yasmina, this is to me, I'm assuming. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we have been running surveys. We've done some huge surveys where we've tried to capture a lot of data globally. So we're a global business, and each of our regions have had slightly different experiences of the pandemic. But we've also done micro surveys as well, and also focus groups with managers to actually find out if there is any reluctance and what the appetite is to return.
And what has been the appetite?
So, well, because we haven't officially been able to open the offices without restrictions, we are limited in the amount of people that we can actually physically have in the office. We're quite lucky because we do have quite a flexible space in London, as an example, where we can accommodate quite a few people because we've got a lot of different kinds of spaces. But the appetite has been quite mixed. Some people in our early careers workforce have been quite keen to return because they haven't got the right areas to work in at home, and they also miss the social interactions. Others who perhaps live further away have been quite reluctant because very concerned about the commute. So it's been quite mixed, but I think it's changed also throughout the pandemic, and I think it will keep changing. So at the beginning, people were quite happy at home. We've then had a sort of uplift now in people that are quite keen to return because we've been at home for so long. But not on a 5-day basis, as Heather touched on earlier, and it would be more flexible around how people want to come into the office.
Okay, we're fine. Yeah, sorry, it's just that we're fine. We want everybody to come back to the office, but we've run these surveys as well, and actually we're finding that people are telling us that they don't really want to come back, and so we're sort of in this kind of difficult phase where a lot of the team are quite happy working from home, but actually from a business perspective, do we want people to come back? And it's sort of an interesting question, isn't it?
I think for me, Yasmina, that's about the reluctance piece. So it's really understanding why there is that reluctance to come back in, and just spending time and actually talking to people rather than surveys about why they feel reluctant, and how we can ensure that they feel safe when they return. So we've done some conversations around that as well, and that will continue on. And I think this is going to be quite a long journey. And you're almost going to have to remind people of why it's nice to come back to the office and collaborate and see your work colleagues and friends.
It's a marketing issue, yes, there you go. I had a question related to that, and it was whether, because Bravura, of course, have offices in a number of different jurisdictions, and the UK has been hit a bit harder than some other countries. What's been the appetite to return to the office in, say, Australia or other offices?
Well, we actually have an office in New Zealand, Heather, so they've probably managed it in a completely different way and had a very different experience. So again, even though they've had a different experience, they have faced lockdown, they have worked from home. So it's definitely disrupted the way that they work, and we've piloted new ways of working out there, and people are keen to still come together, but again on a different basis, and it's sort of sitting around that 50% mark of their time in the office, and actually coming in, similar to what Simon was saying, for an activity and a purpose, and to specifically see people. But again, that may differ depending on level of experience, and that early careers piece, again, they're quite keen to come in and sort of learn through experience.
Great. And that was something that Simon, I think, had mentioned, that it's not the roles that are office-based, but the activities that are office-based. Yeah. And that's the new way that we need to think about it. I'm going to move on now to Tom, if that's okay. But we'll have time for lots of chat in the breakout sessions. Tom Walker, co-head of Global Property Securities at Schroders. If I could pass over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Thanks for the presentation so far, guys. All very interesting stuff. So yeah, I'm just approaching this from a real estate investment point of view. So I run a global real estate fund. We're investing in kind of all the major cities around the world. And I think probably the first point to make is the experience that we've are having here in the UK. It is not kind of it's pretty unique, as has been hinted at. You know, if you look at what's going on in Sydney and Melbourne, Hong Kong, Tokyo, you know, the working kind of world is actually pretty normal. You know, there's face-to-face conferences going on in China, people having face-to-face meetings, which is something we can kind of almost only dream of. And if you look at mobility trends, you know, you can look at Google mobility trends, you can see these trends really kind of coming out there. And the UK is really kind of obviously at the where it's beginning to come out of the kind of the issues now, but really the UK has been sort of front and center in kind of, you know, peak lockdown, I suppose. I think also what's very interesting is when you think about the future of cities, I think if you just take a step back and look through history, we've had many crises before, which in theory could have spelt the end of the city. And if you go back to the Great Fire of London, you go back to kind of, you know, cholera outbreaks in cities, and they've all led to dramatic changes in cities after these kind of big events. And so, you know, there was a great quote from Norman Foster that I read that was just saying that what a crisis does is it just magnifies the inevitable change. And I think, you know, working from home, e-commerce, none of this is new. You know, at Schroders, we moved into this smart headquarters in London probably about 2 years ago now. And there were only desks for 70% of the workforce. Senior management were encouraging us to work from home, and that was 2 years ago. You know, the reality is that if we moved into that new building today, they'd probably only have desks for 40 or 50% as opposed to 70. But the point is that trend was already in the market. And so when you look around the cities, how real estate's being used, it's just being used in a very different way. It's the same as e-commerce. And you think about, you know, kind of the amount of stuff we're all consuming online. And again, that is not new. That inevitable change that was going to occur over 5 or 10 years has just been accelerated dramatically, probably by about 5 years. You know, so I was reading reports probably 3-4 years ago talking about maybe a peak of 30% of all retail sales being made online. And I'm now reading reports talking about 50% of all retail sales being made online. So that's just going to change how shopping centers are used. Shops are, you know, do we need as many shops anymore? Just as people are asking, you know, do we need as many offices anymore? So I think one of the most interesting trends that we believe will happen, and as has been hinted at already, we are in the early stages of this. You know, all these surveys saying, I want to work from home 1 day a week or 4 days a week. The answer that people give today will be very different, I think, in 12 months' time. Just as, you know, Annalise was, or sorry, as was referred to earlier, was just saying, you know, in the first lockdown, we're all quite happy at home, whereas now we're pretty bored of it. And so I think in another 12 months, you'll find those surveys will change a bit. But what is interesting so far in the surveys that we can predict from working from home trends is Europe as a region, we want to work from home more than other parts of the world. So the surveys we've seen across Europe, the average is about 2.2 days a week. In the US, it's about 1.8 day a week. And then in Asia, it's only about 1.2 days a week. Now, a lot of this has to do with where you live and what your commute is like. You know, if you think in Hong Kong, the average accommodation is about 180 square feet, whereas in the States, it's about 800 square feet. And if in Hong Kong you've got a very short commute, it's very easy to get to the office, then actually, you know, working from home is not that appealing. And it's actually pretty nice to go in and meet people. So you've got to factor these kinds of things, you know, into your thinking about cities and how they might change. One of the most plausible things that we have been researching and coming up with so far is that we think that arguably cities will just become younger. If you think of the people who generally don't really care too much about COVID, want to get back into the office because of the collaboration and the kind of information they will get, it's the young professionals. So there's a real desire for, you know, the young professionals to get into the office, and arguably, you know, older people more affected by COVID might move out of cities, and then arguably the cities will become a far more dynamic, open-minded, innovative cities than we have today. And bearing in mind, cities are already pretty, you know, innovative beasts as they are today. So I think that's, you know, something to really consider is, you know, whether cities actually become more affordable for young professionals, and you get, you know, a higher percentage of young people living in cities and enjoying all the benefits that cities can give. I think also with regard to how offices work and the demand for it, there is no doubt that we need less office space. The question is what happens to the office. And again, what we think will happen is this kind of hub and spoke model. So you have a central hub where you network, you collaborate, you innovate, and then you go back to a regional hub. Now, the big question right now is whether you go into a Regus style serviced office in your regional hub, or actually you don't even bother with that and you just work from home. Because again, my gut feel is that you probably only want to go into the office if you're going to sit next door to someone who's going to help your day, help your job, you know, make you better at it. You're not going to be that keen to go into a serviced office and just sit next to some random people, you know, that may not be able to benefit you. So we just need to see how that plays out. But again, it's very early days, so we're just not sure. Aside from that, I think that, you know, when it comes to real estate investments for us, the real estate market has been changing. This crisis is just magnifying that inevitable change. So we're very wary of investing in offices, very wary of investing in retail, which again is not new. I could have told you that before the pandemic. You know, we're far more interested in investing in things like, you know, data centers, mobile phone towers, all the digital connectivity that has been so important to us, as well as things like, you know, healthcare facilities or student housing or self-storage assets. So retail and office for us are just kind of part of a dying part of the real estate equation, but they were dying before the pandemic because trends were kind of eroding the pricing power that the landlords used to have. So it's a really fast moving investment world out there, and COVID has just made it happen so much quicker. And I think there's going to be a lot of kind of, you know, a lot of losers in the real estate world and then a lot of winners, but you really have to kind of be on top of the trends. So that's all I've got to say, Heather. Hopefully that kind of gives people a little bit of what they're looking for.
Yeah, Tom, a question for you, and there might be some. We have about 5 minutes before we go into the breakout rooms. One of the things I've heard a number of times is that with one of the drivers of innovation in Silicon Valley was because you had a number of people who were meeting informally, not just with people within their own company, but in I don't know what they do in Silicon Valley. They probably don't go to a bar. They probably like go to the smoothie bar or something. But that importance of having meeting with people who you don't work with, sharing ideas, collaborating informally, that was really important to forming those networks. And it was one of the reasons that the UK tried to create the Silicon Roundabout, so that you could have a place where people would congregate, not just within their own company. And so what you said about hub and spoke, and that you're only going to go to the office if the person sitting next to you is going to benefit you directly, that just seems a bit counter to that idea. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, if you think about urbanization, which has been obviously kind of occurring over many centuries and will continue for many more, it's all about exactly what you say. It's about collaboration and collusion. And cities they're one of the very rare kind of organisms, if you can call them that actually get more efficient as they get bigger. And so that's what's been driving people to cities. And I think, you know, we're going to see a slight slowdown of that because of COVID, but that is ultimately why cities will not die. And you will continue to see cities as being clusters of expertise. And I think that, you know, probably the best example that, you know, one of the cities we love investing in as well as love visiting is Boston, which is the poster child for collaboration and collusion between all the intellect that you have at MIT and Harvard, and then all the pharmaceutical companies like Moderna and Johnson & Johnson that are coming up with the vaccines to not only COVID, but also researching many other incurable diseases. And in that city, you have this great collusion between the academic world and then the private industries, if you like, trying to monetize that innovation. And that is exactly why cities won't die, and exactly why the headlines that are saying, you know, cities are dead is just so wrong, because of those, you know, efficiencies we can create. So, you know, I completely agree with you on that, and the continual need for all of us, you know, for all of us to get better at our jobs. You have to be around people that give you those ideas. That's why, you know, conferences are just so good, because you just bump into someone, have that conversation. You just, it's not even in the meeting room, it's probably having a coffee or a drink, and that's what gives you the idea to start your business or to go and invest in something new or whatever it might be.
Yeah, great. Any other questions before we move into the breakout? Well, hopefully we move into the breakout rooms. No, great. Thank you, Tom. I mean, I thought that was a really good arc to the conversation, talking about the workplace, and we definitely talked about culture and workplace and the role of the office. And one of the terms that Annalise and Simon uses is it becomes the club, and that definitely came through with some of Sally Ann's comments about you know, people's appetite to return to the office and what role the office plays, and then feeding into Tom's comments about hub and spoke and what, you know, when people want to go to the office and why it's still important, and actually it's just part of its acceleration of trends that were already in play. Fantastic, and I think sets us up really well for our discussion. So Alex, if you could send everybody to their breakout rooms, you should appear there and spend 15 minutes, then come back. Hold on to your hats. I hope your session was as good as mine. I loved those breakout sessions. That was good fun. And well done, Alex. It worked brilliantly. So I'm now going to ask each of the session hosts to summarize what happened in their rooms. I'm going to ask Janine last because I was in her room. So Gillian, I see you smiling, so I'll come to you first.
Great. Well, we had great fun in our room and loads of interesting discussions. And the phrase that sticks in my mind towards the end of our discussion was organised agility, because actually we're on a journey here, aren't we? So how do we really make this happen in practice as opposed to in theory? You know, for example, if we're all wanting to have flexibility, then do you know what? I'd quite like to work at home on a Monday and a Friday because it suits me. So how do we make sure that we really work this rota system? We also, though, started with a few comments around, obviously the sessions were really interesting in terms of looking at office space and how it was set up. But how does it work whilst we're still in a situation where there's a virus that's running around, in terms of, you know, cleaning desks? And, you know, I don't want to sit on a desk that somebody else was at yesterday because they could have COVID. So, you know, a number of us have worked through that in the last year when we have had times back in the office and had to be in fixed desks. So suddenly we're moving from fixed to flexible. It's just some interesting challenges there. We also talked about, you know, just the general office space. If it's reducing, what will it become? Tom gave us an interesting theory of Debenhams turning into a crazy golf place, that all sorts of things happening. But also we talked about the whole concept of people moving out of the city, and is that really happening? I think they're just moving slightly further out, but maybe not all the way out. And I think it was an interesting debate around the whole cost of office space going forwards. We talked quite a lot about this whole half and half piece, and I'm sure Sarah, who had some great comments to make, might take part in the more generic debate. But I think we did agree that this is probably going to be more challenging than we all think when we actually start to put this into practice. So I think I'll leave everybody with a word or the phrase that we liked, or I liked, which was, how do we manage with organised agility? Does that help?
Yeah, excellent. Love that. Organized agility. Was it organized agility? Yeah.
Organized agility. That's
Love
what
that.
we like. How do you get there? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
or is that,
we'll leave that to Alex.
Or is that what we actually end up with? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really good debate to have. You know, what will it look like in practice? Yeah. And we're on a journey.
Fantastic. Jackie, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, sure. We narrowed down, or I narrowed down the conversation to talk about the challenges and opportunities of working and returning to the office. So some key things that we spoke about was the unconscious bias, unfair advantage, and will people in the office be advantaged? And actually, if you do have people dialing into a meeting and some people at home, everyone thinks that it's all going well, but then the people in the office have a debrief after the meeting, and actually what happened becomes totally different to what the person at home thought was happening. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing, how we basically, the conversation was around, is the worst scenario a hybrid? So we do have some people in the office and some people out. And definitely the unconscious bias and how we overcome that. The roster system and how that works, is that the way that we need to do it? That for certain team meetings, collaboration, you're basically told you need to come into the office for them, and otherwise it's whomever wants to come into the office. How do you make the office a destination? So great if you've got lots of money and you can get Simon and the team in to make it looking lovely. But what if you don't, and actually people have no need to go into the office? Ramping up social events, and that's the way that you need to get people back in. So putting more focus on actually having great things and for people to come in for. And then we had a discussion around, can people live anywhere now? So, you know, basically if we're working from home, can someone be living in Portugal or the US? And we had a discussion around tax and that kind of thing. But I think the outcome of that was quite possibly depending on time zones. Maintaining culture and training, two big challenges that we didn't get to tackle and discuss, but I think they're really, really critical. But then we finished with the fact that actually this way of working has been incredibly positive from a work-life perspective. And I think most people thought we don't want to lose all of this fantastic flexibility that we've gained. And that's it for me.
Fantastic. I totally agree. Hybrid is the worst scenario. We tested it at a board meeting I had in November, December, and the people who weren't in the room it was like they may as well have been one of those conference call things where nobody could actually talk to the person on the phone. 100%. And I think your comment about making the office a destination and social events, that's really important. And I think Simon mentioned that in his intro remarks too. Fantastic. Can I come to Emma next, please?
We weren't as necessarily as organised as everyone else's room, it seems. I haven't got any notes, but I did. That's because I was so excited about the conversations we were having. But we had some good conversations, and one of them was, when we were all together, Yasmina was talking about the fact that what do you do if not everybody wants to come back to the office? And one of the guys in my room was talking about what if half do and half don't? And how do you manage everyone? Because actually you want this collaborative working environment, and you feel that it can help when you've got some people really sticking their heels in, saying, I don't want to come back because there's no need for me to come back. So that generated some discussion. We also spoke about some people like the commute to the office for a bit of downtime in between meetings, but also versus the fact that normal would have been, you know, elbows and fighting your way on the tube and along the streets to get to the office, and how nice it was not to have to do that. But if you went back to normal, would it be that, or would you stagger your day, and how would that impact on general meetings and scheduling of appointments and things like that? We did speak a little bit about the TP office and Simon's presentation, which was great. And just because of my history, I was explaining to people that, you know, that type of TP office in the square mile probably would stand out like a sore thumb. But TP was a big office in a car park, in a great big car park in the outskirts of Newcastle. So they really wanted to have that collaboration, because you couldn't just walk out the door and go and get a sandwich from the shop or go to the pub at lunchtime. So to sort of understand how TP did that was actually quite, it wasn't just the fact that they wanted a funky new office. They actually thought about the fact that you can't just go down the road and sit in the park or whatever. So we spoke a bit about that. But just general well-being, Peter was explaining about a board meeting that he had this week, where inside Bravura, it's a global company, so you've got people in Australia that it's already tomorrow when it's late at night over here. So how do you manage that with everything else is going on during the day as well? So that's quite difficult. And just general chatter about sort of well-being and flexibility and what is good and what it's going to be like for everyone. And I think the kind of summary is it's going to be different for everyone, and you've got to tiptoe your way into it and be able to change as you go, because you can't just suddenly make all these decisions now, because it might not suit everyone straight away. So I think agility is probably a key buzzword for us right now.
Great, thank you. I think that context about true potential not being in a big city is really important, actually, because the experience for companies, depending on where they're headquartered, is really different. And I was great to hear that some people liked their commute and miss it. Janine, is that a good segue to you?
Yeah, it is. Thanks, Heather. So in our session, we talked about a lot regarding the logistics of going back. So we talked about what would happen, for instance, if everybody wanted to be in the office and we haven't got the desk space to accommodate them. And in particular, when you've got leaders, the CEO, the MD, are going in, maybe for town halls, or perhaps because they've made a scheduled visit. Would everybody want to be in the office at that time? And there were some cultural differences that was coming out actually in the conversation, which was interesting. So really that sort of dominated the bulk of the conversation. And then what does collaboration mean? So, this is something that I must admit I threw out there. It's what does it mean for a leader of a team who has now the team in the office? And how can we make sure that we maximize the time we have with our team? It's a slightly different way of working. So really, thinking about that, and there's a lot of pressure, I guess, on leaders now to think about that. And then we talked a little bit about FaceTime and what that would mean. We didn't quite go into the same depth of conversation around biases, but I can imagine if we had more time, we probably would have done. Then quite a lot about travel, actually, and the lifestyle decisions that we're making now. And well, we're not making them because we haven't got a choice, but how we've got used to a certain lifestyle working from home. And the nostalgia, Heather mentioned the nostalgia of actually being able to sit down and have a family meal, or be with your family every evening, which is something that we haven't had access to obviously previously. And really that sort of anxiety that's starting to creep in with people now realizing that actually, lockdown is coming to an end and we're going to have to start traveling in. So there's that sort of dichotomy between people who are making the decision to stay at home and change the way they're working because of lifestyle reasons, and those who are actually really quite anxious about having to travel in and be around people again, and maybe even actually socially interacting for the first time on a face-to-face basis for over a year. So those are the real sort of gists of the discussions we had. And the one thing I would leave you with is actually something that was mentioned in my group, which is around defining what the new normal means. Nobody really knows what that means. We talk about it, but we don't actually know what that new normal means. And it may be different things to different people. But certainly from my perspective, it'd be quite nice to have a look at that and define what that means.
Great, thank you. So as the host, it's usually my job to summarize, but I don't think I need to, because the hosts of our various breakout rooms did an absolutely brilliant job. Thank you, Janine. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Gillian. And thank you, Emma. And it wasn't purposely that we were all female moderators. I just sent out a note to our sponsors of the Investment Network, and they were the ones who came back. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you to our speakers, Simon, Annalise, Tom, and Sally Ann. And with that, I will pass you back to Clive.
Hopefully I'm muted now. Thank you, Heather, and thank you, everybody. That was absolutely super. It was as good a meeting as I thought it would be. I'm left with a number of questions. I'll mention one. A slight concern of mine is that a certain type will go back to the office, which is the alpha male and the alpha female. There are some of those too, and the pleasers. I'm slightly concerned that there are more males than females in that category, and we'll get a bias of men going back to the office and a bias of women not going back to the office. I think that's something that needs to be managed very, very carefully. But there are just so many questions there. And I think we've had a lot of potential answers today. Personally, it's been absolutely worthwhile meeting. What we're going to do now is, for those who want to stay on and have a virtual drink, I've got my glass ready. I've got a bottle, so we can have a chat as if we were at a network meeting at the bar. So those who want to stay, please do. Can I remind you of future meetings? We've got the meeting on April the 22nd. We will have a virtually TIN meeting in May. Then July the 2nd, we've got the drinks get together at Schroders head office in the city. I apologise to people who can't get to London. London clearly is the biggest place to have such a meeting, but it can't suit everyone, I know that. And then we're getting back to a real meeting in October, a face-to-face meeting. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Heather, again. Thank you, all our speakers, and thank you all for turning up. Please stay on for a glass. I'm going to pour myself one now, so cheers.